All right, let's check your answers on these problems before starting your quiz. Question 7a is the difference of perfect squares like in lesson 1. So we have the subtraction sign for difference, and 81 is a perfect square, and 16x to the fourth is a perfect square. I know for some of you having the variable at the end kind of threw you off, but just that's where it's at, so let it be. So for the difference of perfect squares, we had to take the square root of the first term, we had to take the square root of the last term, and we put it in factor form. So let's find the square root of each term. So first take the square root of 81, that is a perfect square, it equals 9. Take the square root of 16x to the fourth. 16 is a perfect square, and it is, when you take the square root, it is equal to 4. X to the fourth, anytime your exponents are even, they give you perfect squares. So when you take the square root of x to the fourth, it is x squared. So 9 is your A term, 4x squared is your B term, and again, just because the variable's at the end, don't let that throw you off. That's just what it is. So here we have 9 and 4x squared, 9 and 4x squared. We put our plus and our minus sign for the factored form. Notice we have another difference of perfect squares. If you can continue factoring, you must do so. The sum of perfect squares is not factorable, so that part there will stay in our final answer. But here we have the difference of 9 is a perfect square and 4x squared is a perfect square. So because that is factorable, we must continue. Let's do again. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 4x squared. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of x squared is x. So that's our new A and B for factoring this difference of perfect square. The sum of squares, remember, is not factorable when it has the plus sign. So leave that in your factored answer. So 9 plus 4x squared. We're going to factor now this difference of square. We said 3 and 2x. So 3 and 2x, 3 and 2x, and put your plus and minus sign. So this is our completely factored answer for question 7a. 7b, this is actually a GCF problem. Yes, I know I see subtraction, so we think about difference of perfect squares, but 60x to the 7th is not a perfect square. Also, 12x to the 5th is not a perfect square. So just because it has a subtraction sign does not mean that it factors as the difference of squares. Look for a GCF. So go over to the side and do your prime factorization. I prefer starting with my variables first. I look at my smallest exponent, so x to the 5th. If I'm going to factor out those x to the 5th, it's going to subtract that from what you started with. So we'll have 60x squared minus, if you're going to factor out those x to the 5th, if we're factoring those out, then we no longer will have them with that term, that 12. So it just becomes a 12. Also look for a number. This one had variables and numbers as your GCF. So a prime number that goes into 60 and 12 is a 2. 2 goes into 60 30 times. Don't forget to bring down your variable. 2 goes into 12 6 times. Continue dividing by primes until both numbers can no longer be divided by primes. I can divide by another 2. 2 goes into 30 15 times. Again, don't forget your variable each time you bring it down. 2 goes into 6 3 times. And we could divide by 3. 3 goes into 15 5 times. 3 goes into itself once. Getting a little crooked there. The numbers on the outside, those are GCF, so multiply them all together. 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 makes 12, and of course don't forget your variable. So we have 12x to the 5th as our GCF, and then the leftovers here at the bottom is what's going in your parentheses as your leftovers. So we have 5x squared minus 1. This will not have 2 sets of parentheses. If you're factoring out a GCF, it's just what's out front times 1 set of parentheses. My advice to you when starting the quiz is pick one type of problem. Go through and look for all the difference of squares, or go through and look for all the GCFs. Work all of those types of problems and then go back and do the other ones. When you finish the quiz, you need to start working on lesson 3. It's going to be very important that you understand lesson 3 in order to do well in lesson 4. Good luck on your quiz. You'll do great.